This is Michael Ostrolenk, and I'm speaking with Pete Sepp. He's Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayer Union. Afternoon, Pete.
Thanks for having me. Good
Certainly.
afternoon.
Now, there is an effort on the center right amongst conservatives and libertarians to recognize that based on the $16 trillion in debt and the new changing dynamics in the world, including the completion of the Iraq conflict and the drawdown beginning really shortly, if not already started, in Afghanistan, that we need reforms at the Pentagon. And one of the reforms of the Pentagon includes rational cuts that we no longer can afford, nor do we need to spend the types of money we have been spending for our defense. That's something I know that NTU supports, is rational cuts at the Pentagon. Speak to your interest in that, and then we'll get into some of the politics and policies around it.
Absolutely. Since our founding in 1969, we have been concerned about the growth and the costs of all areas of government, not just at home, but in our military abroad. The truth is, we have to put a price tag, and a rational one, on defending the nation. There are those who say there cannot be such a thing. What price defense? Anything it takes. Well, if you have that attitude, you get a country like North Korea that chews up so much of its gross domestic product on military spending that there's nothing else left for a market economy. We don't want that in the United States, and I don't think that you have to be extremist about the subject to admit that, look, there need to be priorities set in every area of government, including the United States military. So, throughout the years, we've worked on projects like opposing the MX missile project during the Carter and Reagan administrations, the B-1 bomber, which we were later vindicated on when we raised concerns that not only was it too costly, but it could have a lot of performance problems that would need to be fixed in the future. We've worked on issues such as the F-22 Raptor and the rising costs there, the Comanche helicopter, the Crusader artillery system. These projects, fortunately, Comanche and Crusader, were canceled owing to fiscal policy concerns as well as need. And those occurred under a Republican-dominated Pentagon. I think that's an encouraging sign that some true fiscal conservatives can hear our message, and that by pairing up with those on the left of center side of the ideological spectrum, we can have some real progress in getting to what's really necessary to defend the country and what we need to do without. I think one of the prime examples right now is the F-35 fighter. We have, of course, several versions underway. We recommended with United States Public Interest Research Group, commonly known as USPIRG, that the Marine Corps and Navy versions be scaled back, and instead the F-18 aircraft that's currently serving them very well be bought instead in the future. That could save taxpayers a lot of money while still giving the military a useful tool, one that it needs.
This past summer, and this is 2012, right before Congress recessed, there was an amendment put forth by Mulvaney, a conservative Republican, that would slow the growth of Pentagon spending just to, in 2013 to 2012 levels. And it was passed in the House. It had 89 Republicans, including the congressman who promoted it. I think those numbers are really good, especially on this type of issue, because it seems to me that in the past it's been difficult for Republicans who rhetorically are good in terms of fiscal conservatism and practice are not so good, especially when it comes to the Pentagon. However, let me ask you, what do you think we on the right need to do to move those numbers from 89 to 150 to 180, moving on up?
Well, I think we need to highlight more the true dismal performance of some of these systems and how they're virtually unfixable and that they have to be scrapped in favor of some kind of new design. Fiscal conservatives are good at weighing the costs and benefits of many domestic projects. They haven't always been as forthright in doing the same thing with defense projects. And we have to admit to ourselves as well that for the stories we hear about the GSA conference in Las Vegas, all of the waste going on in some of the green energy programs. The Pentagon's basic core financial operations have been on the Government Accountability Office's high risk list for years, almost since the list was initiated. We need to also understand, I think, that government spending of any kind, especially deficit spending, tends to have similar effects. Not necessarily the same effects, but when the right criticizes, for example, all of the money that was tossed away on pointless infrastructure spending in the stimulus package back in 2009. But now there's concern that the so-called sequesters, the cuts and slowdowns in defense spending, are going to lead to devastating consequences for the private sector economy. Well, you can't have that argument both ways. If you want to argue that our nation's security might suffer if we don't spend X amount of dollars on X system, well, that's one thing. But to say that if the federal government spends less on weapons systems, the economy is going to suffer, how do you reconcile that with all of the criticism in the stimulus bill? You have to be consistent here, and that's a message I think we need to take to the conservative community as well. Big government anywhere, wasteful government anywhere, is inexcusable.
Another thing that we've been starting to work on is in support of an audit of the Pentagon. Now, there's a bill that was recently introduced right before Congress went into recess in the Senate that would call for an audit, and I understand that there's one in the House that has also been introduced too. And it's really early on, so it hasn't gotten a lot of support and a lot of publicity. But it seems to me that it's something that conservatives and all the folks on the center right should be able to support. What's your take on an audit of the Pentagon?
I think based on previous performance and continued problems with so many different kinds of weapons systems, with basic financial accounting, with computer modernization, a Pentagon-wide audit would be a very desirable way to try and get a handle on the scope of the problem and a comprehensive solution for it. We continue to get just streams of bad information out of the Pentagon, and by bad information I don't necessarily mean poor quality, I mean bad news. We just don't seem to be establishing the kinds of incentives and structural reforms that could make the Pentagon a more efficient and effective steward of tax dollars. If we don't do that in an operation that runs more than $500 billion a year, what are we going to expect? We're going to expect tens of billions of dollars wasted every year. That's something we could never afford, and it's something we especially can't afford now.
Great. Thank you, Pete.
My pleasure.